So welcome to IFSO Global Registry meeting. We are just live here in Lyon, and we have been discussing during this day some aspects related to our program of registry. We have some points to be discussed, and the moderators, the chairs of this session is myself and Wendy Brown. We have here Mehan Ambari, Ricardo Coingin, and Carl Richard Welborn as also moderators of this session. So the first presentation is why IFSO is interested in registries. So let me give you some points. I don't have any disclosure related to this presentation. This is my case discuss slide. And it's very interesting because one issue is to have a national registry. Another one is to have a registry coming from, you can see, 65 societies based in almost 10,000 members. And if we sum 65 with 30, we will have surgeons coming from almost 100 countries. So we are composing different realities from almost 100 countries, divided in 5 chapters. Asia Pacific, North America, European, Middle East, North Africa, and Latin America. So it's our job to do this kind of association that is not easy. And the registry, I think, is part of what we have as vision and mission for IFSO. That the vision is to optimize the control of adiposity-based chronic disease, and the mission is to unify the global scientific, surgical, and integrated health communities for the purpose of dissemination of knowledge, collaboration, establishing universal standards. So, look, establish universal standard. This is part of our registry. We have been doing different educational activities in IFSO, much of them based in social media. And we have webinars, like this is one of the webinars we did in January of this year. Again, educational. Education, again, in terms of improving the skills of the surgeons. Education by means of using our magazine, the journal that is Obesity Surgery, and education as we used to do in the Congress also. We just yesterday, we closed the receiving of abstracts for Madrid, and we have over 1,200. That is 100 cases, 100 abstracts more than last year in Dubai. So, why IFSO is interested in registries? One of the reasons should be because this is an opportunity to learn and educate based in the experience with different places, but basically 5 chapters. We have similarities and we have differences to be analyzed. Also, we know the complexity of the disease we are facing, obesity, with this trillions of numbers that we have related obesity. We are trying to change a little the message of IFSO from obesity to adiposity. Again, education about what kind of result, that our result is not 100% based just in weight loss. We have to check different issues. We have to check improvement of comorbidities, quality of life, expectations of the patient. Again, education. This is not working properly. Again, we have to think about the message we are creating when we talk about malabsorption. I think we are not trying to have malabsorption to our patients. Malabsorption, it is a disease, and we have an ICD for malabsorption. So again, we have to educate about the result. What do we expect about the surgery? And when we have some problem, what is the problem? I think another discussion is that we are not talking about failure. There is no failure of the surgeon, there is no failure of the technique. So, another goal of our registry is to knowing better the disease that we are facing, that we are fighting, and what kind of results we can have with our procedures. Then we know that works pretty good. We have a lot of studies proving that bariatric and metabolic surgery is much superior than clinical treatment over the treatment of obesity and metabolic disorders. And also we have studies about the good of the cost of effectiveness of our procedures. So we really believe in our bariatric metabolic procedures to treat obesity and metabolic disorders. It's not working, the microphone. So another point is to understand better the kind of benefit we are offering with bariatric and metabolic interventions. And we have to consider that we have different procedures, different places, different situations, and we have that the registry will allow us to interpret these differences. This is one of the registries we used to have in IFSO that is just based in a form that the secretary of IFSO sent to the president of the societies, and this president of the societies, based in the information they receive from the members, will do this form, will fill this form with this data. So this data is related to 2014. We have another one from 2016, and you see that when we compare one to another, it's not moving. We have about 18% of increase in the number of procedures here. This is the last one, is closest to 700,000. But when we look, even that we defend a lot of procedure, the benefit for the patient, the general penetration of bariatric and metabolic surgery is 0.02. It's zero. 0.02 is nothing. And the penetration in the patients with severe obesity, that patients that deserve the procedure is about 0.7 to 1.5. So we are far from the ideal situation we are looking for. Again, I think that the registry can help us in order to try to understand what kind of barrier we are facing, what the numbers of procedures are not improving, are not increasing in the way we think we should go. So we have some studies about this, but look, this is one of the interesting ones. This was done by ASMBS in 2010, and Raul Rosenthal did this study, and the title is Perceived Barriers to Bariatric Surgery Among Morbid Obese Patients. And the hypothesis that they had at that moment is that the lack of insurance coverage and financial support are or should be the main reasons for patients not consulting a center to be evaluated for bariatric surgery and to be recommended for a bariatric surgery. This was the initial hypothesis. They did a study, and we have a couple more of studies like this in the literature. And when we look for these real reasons, the first one that will appear is fear of the surgical risk. I'm afraid I can die during this procedure. This is the first reason that we have in different studies about this issue in the literature. The second one is fear again, but this is a different kind of fear. It is apprehensiveness with the post-operative changes in eating habits. Will I be able to have a sandwich like this, to have beer, to have a soft drink? What will be the changes I have to do in order to have a good result with this procedure. Number 3, do not consider themselves as candidates for surgery. Look, I'm just good. I'm good. I'm not obese, because they consider obesity as just something, a physical status that's not related really as a disease. We know that in the United States they recognize obesity just a disease just 5 years ago. So this is another issue we have in IFSO to discuss and to convince people that obesity is a disease and deserves treatment. Number 4, take into account obesity is an aesthetic problem. Just, okay, I am obese, but look, this is just aesthetic. I don't have any problem with my pressure. I don't have any problem with diabetes. I'm okay. This is something that I think we can change a lot with registries. Reason number 5, lack of surgical recommendation by the GP, the clinician that are managing the patient. Because with the data of the registry, we can convince them. I know that we have a lot of RCTs that should convince, but they are not convinced. They need real-world data. This is what they are telling us. Okay, but look, this study is about 100 patients. I want to see 3,000. I want to see what will happen with 5,000 or 6,000 patients. So show me this data, and I will be convinced that your surgery is okay. Number 6. This is, if you remember, this is the reason number 1 that ASMBS thought that should be the reason about the number of procedures, and appeared just as the number 6, that is financial for the procedure. Number 7, long waiting list for preparing for doing the procedure. Number 8, why I should do that? Because my cousin, my colleague did in the past and is obese again. Weight relapse after the procedure. No, I don't like to have this, because I know that I should consume supplementation vitamins for the rest of my life, and I don't like this. And the last one, the 10, that is the distance from the site that performs the surgery. So these are the 10 reasons. When they look for that, the conclusion about that study is that lack of insurance coverage is not the main reason for that. So here again, I think the registry can help us in order to understand better the different barriers we have in the different countries, because this, what I just showed you, is general. I think that we have to analyze to see what is important in Brazil, in Europe, or in other countries about that, because this will help us in order to overcome this kind of barriers we have. Another reasons, understand different levels of response that we can have from different patients with bariatric and metabolic procedures related to the place, to ethnicity, to the kind of procedure. Remember, we have a lot of bariatric procedures. We have right now bands, sleeve, Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, one anastomosis gastric bypass, one anastomosis duodenal switch, standard duodenal switch, and every month we have a different procedure to analyze. So I think the registry will help us also to identify which one of these procedures can be good or not. But maybe the main reason for that, when we think that we are part of 5 chapters that we are covering worldwide, is that we need something like this in order to improve the outcomes of our procedure. So the main reason should be the improvement of outcomes in different worldwide realities. Maybe this should be the most important reason for us as IFSO to be involved with registries. So this is the reason we decided in 2014, we did the first IFSO Global Registry report, 16 the second. We have the third one, we have the fourth, and we are working in the next one. So right now, what we have is about 800,000 and 20,000 patients enrolled with data coming from 61 countries. Please remember that we have 2 weeks more, so you that are in your hospital, in your home, looking at us here, send your data to us. We need data because we think that the more data we have, the more strong will be the registry. Remember how we can use this kind of information. We are just merging in the 4.0 generation of surgery. That is a surgery guided basically by information. So this data will be very useful and establish different studies and patterns. So we are working with digital health. We can have a different kind of information. And what we have will be an association in between robotics, instrumentation, enhanced visualization, connectivity, and the registry, I think, will fit very good here. That is data analytics and learning machine or machine learning. Because with this data in the future, maybe we can have some help to decide for which patient we should do a gastric bypass or a sleeve gastrectomy. And in that patient that we are doing a gastric bypass, what should be the best measurement for the biliary limb? So data and data is much welcome right now in order to establish different patterns. So I think these are the main reasons that IFSO is really very interested in registries. I want to thank you all for spending the day here with us. It was an amazing day. And right now we have, let's keep the comments for the end, no? So François Patou from France is our next presenter here. Come here, François.
So thank you very much, Almino. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I would be happy to share with you our view, or at least my view, of a registry. What for? And what are the challenges ahead of us? So first of all, so I will go briefly through the purpose of a registry. I will briefly talk about the data. Then I will come to the challenges ahead of us and the reasons for hope to finish. So the first question is why an organization such as IFSO, a global organization, should embark into this initiative, which is obviously cumbersome and time-consuming for all of us. So there are different answers to this question, and all of them are legitimate, and they are not exclusive one to the other. I can see three reasons to embark into that. First is communication. The next one is quality improvement, and the last one, research, and we'll come back. So first, communication. We have two types, external, internal. I think as an organization, it's very important to organize ourselves to be visible and credible for the outside world. Of course, we know each other, we know our specialty, but we need to be well organized to show our specialty and our results in the most credible way. And this is an important task, which is presenting our specialty to the world and to the outside world, including every stakeholder, payers, institutions worldwide. And the registry is obviously a very nice way to do that. And we'll come back at the end of the talk about the achievement regarding that issue. Communication for an organization like us is also internal. We are international, we are very diverse. All over the world, practices are very different. And it's important to communicate, to interact, but also to know each other, differences, similarities. And that's also a way that, in a way in which the registry is very helpful to benchmark our practice and to be able to compare, interact each other, one country from the other. So this is about communications. First aspect, output of such a registry. The next one is quality improvement. So this was put by Almino, our president, as a very important output for the initiative, improving the quality of our surgery, the quality of our outcomes. And once again, there is two levels there. There is the individual levels, each participant, each contributor, each center, each surgeon want to improve, to benchmark his or her activity toward others and be able to improve its own results. But there is also the global results as a community to improve the outcome of surgery. And once again, a registry is or can be in that regard very useful or even mandatory to be able to monitor these improvement and to accompany them. So besides quality improvement, the last one is research. Of course, research is for many of us part of our everyday life in academic world, but it's also now in many private practice consubstantial to clinical activity to be able to monitor, but also to innovate and to prepare the future of our specialty. So for research, the registry is a wonderful base ground to build on research project. But if we look now at these three aims and their subdivision, so let's say 5 aims altogether, all come to one point, data. And I should say data, data, data. And I mean data quality. And that's very important to understand that this is crucial. And I think we've heard already 12 times the word data, and I think we will hear it again more than 20 times in the coming hour. Data is really the crucial point. And I would like to share with you my view of what is data quality in terms of a registry perspective. I would see 3 directions, 3 main aspects of data quality. The first one, obvious, is the surface, the perimeter, meaning the number. And regarding number, we are now approaching, not yet, but approaching 1 million of entry of different patients. That's a lot of patients. We are talking here about a huge perimeter. So that's about the power of the society. This is what we represent, an important global society with a lot of activity. So this is perimeter of the potential registry. The next direction, the next option is I would say the depth of the registry, which means the quality of the data, not the quality, the type of the data we are putting in. And this is about the definition of the data. This is about the protocol, the data entry that are prepared for the contributors to enter. And this is about the thinking ahead of entry the data of the registry. And of course, we have a competition here between the surface of the data and, let's say, the depth, meaning that if you have many things to entry, you will be reluctant to do it, and you will have less entry for each individual patient. But not more important, because all 3 directions are very important regarding to the questions you are asking. But the third direction is the granulation, is the quality of the data. When I go to the registry and I'm asking, for example, weight loss, what quality of data, what comprehensiveness of data will I find when I'm looking for the results? And this is something which cannot be anticipated. This is just the contribution of every one of us who is putting data in. But this is crucial because at the end of the story, of course, there is potential data, but when you look at it, it's really not comprehensive or not well defined or not well monitored. This will be very difficult. So once again, to summarize that point, I think that data is the crucial point of any registry output, and we need to be very careful in considering the 3 directions and not only one. Numbers is one point, the type of data is another one, but the quality of the data will be crucial in the long term, because if we let that go, at the end of the road, we will have really nothing. So what are the challenges that we are facing to succeed in that initiative? That will be my third point. So there are many challenges. First of all, there is the definition of data. That sounds quite easy. Gender is an easy, used to be an easy issue. Age, this is easy. Weight, we learned this morning that weight is difficult. Is it initial weight? Is it weight at time of surgery? Simple question like that. You can see that it's difficult. Not talking about biological issues or other quality of life, for example, metrics. This is really something very important to consider. Definition of data. We need to be careful and define clearly the data we want. We want to prioritize and we want to make mandatory. I think this is a crucial point to start with. The next point is the availability of data. And here we are talking not about us. We are talking about our patients. How data can we get from patients we don't see? So we have to be careful to be sure that we are claiming for data that are available, easy for the next month after surgery, a bit tougher for the first year, and nearly not impossible, but very, very tough after 5 or 10 years. So be careful of not over-claiming our capacity of getting long-term data into that registry, because the patients are not there, we will not have any data. The next challenge will be the availability, the time that we can devote, mostly without any money feedback, because there is very little chance that our organization will be able to fund this data entering. So this must be voluntary and this must be easy. And now we have to be very careful that surgeons are surely not the best fitted to do that job, and that we have to be able to have data entry by other colleagues that are more available and sometimes more conscious, with more consciousness about data quality than our surgeons. We are good at the operating theater or follow-up or clinical visits, not at data entry. So the registry must be very, very clear on that we have to be practical. Interface, and that's a very important point of this registry, that the interface, thanks to the provider of the interface, is quite user-friendly and has been improved a lot recently. That makes things easier. But even though it's never enough, and I think it's hardly possible to envision a data entry that lasts more than 10 minutes for each patient. If not, this will be very difficult. And of course, any attempt to facilitate by reuse data already collected for other national or any other organization where it's mandatory for a given surgeon to collect data, very important, and it has been done in a very nice way to be able to collect this data automatically and certainly not to re-entry them. So this is the challenge, and just to finish with the challenge, I think there is one challenge which is just blossoming, and I think we have to be careful, is that we have to consider that other initiative, not driven by our society or by our profession, but mostly by institution, by payers, with agenda different from us, have been now putting together sometimes very important, but always very precise database, mostly based on payment. And this is already the case in several private organizations in North America, but this is also available in several European countries nationwide, because the payer is public and is only one for one country. And these databases are growing and they are existing. And they will have advantages in some certain aspects, such as, for example, long-term follow-up. Of course, they will capture only what they can. But for example, for diabetes, buying a drug for diabetes is a very strong endpoint for diabetes. And you can have very, very reliable data for the long-term follow-up, exhaustiveness with this database. So we have to be careful not to compete with them, because there is no way we can win on their field. But we have to be able to have an interface, to be connected with this database, to take advantage of our power, which is what we aim is the control of our own database. Okay, and then just to finish, after addressing these challenges ahead of us, a few words of hope, at least for what we've seen together. Obviously, the initiative is blooming. And when saying that, I'm just looking at numbers. 1 million, starting a few years ago from 100,000. 1 million will be reached within maybe another 12 or 18 months, very realistically. This is something which is rarely achieved by any other organization, at least on a private base. So I think this is a unique opportunity. And I think that we have to be conscious that we have already achieved some extraordinary result with that. We just need to adjust our aim to what we have. Let's just give an example. I want to do benchmark worldwide about our practice. And looking at the registry report, the last one, I can see that some drawbacks, of course. I'm just looking for mortality, and there is no data. Obvious reason, the way the data are collected, it's very unlikely that we can have any reliable information about mortality. But by the way, these numbers exist in many other sources. But look at this other information. I want to know the practice. And I looked and I saw that the gender repartition of bariatric surgery was extremely variable. Man and woman repartition in indication of surgery was, for me, astonishingly different in varying countries. This is an information I cannot get anywhere else from the registry, and I think is very reliable. Even if the practice in this or that country is only part of the total referral patients of this country, I think this information is very reliable. So we have to be careful to adjust our aim with what we have. This will increase with time, because there is one thing certain about registry: they will increase with time. They cannot go back. You can just add more patients, and the more we will have, the more quality we will get from them. So I can see a nice future. Of course, the road is long. The slope is quite steep. But I think if all of us, we go together and do our little bird effort in this huge initiative, I think we can really achieve important aim for our society. And more importantly, this is our registry, meaning that we get control on it, and the information that we get out of it will be under our control. This is very important, because we want to maybe accompany effort, but we'll also have to defend ourselves against some other initiative that coming from uncontrolled source of data, and we need to be credible to oppose these potentially drawbacks for our profession, solid data to resist. So this was my word. So I think this is what registry for a society like ours should aim. Of course, we need to address challenges. I think we have forces and a good future if everyone is joining efforts. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, excellent, Francois. And our next presenter will be Professor Joa Hottenson, setting up and maintaining a national registry, key issues. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, is this?
Yeah, this one. Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to talk so much about how our registry looks like, and I'm not going to show you a lot of results. I'm going to bring up a few issues that were important for us when we started up the registry, and they are still important when we are maintaining and developing the registry further. I think there has to be some kind of professional consensus when you start a registry. The majority of the profession has to be positive or at least neutral. There will always be some people that are negative, but the majority has to be for a registry, otherwise it's very difficult to start it. The decision-making entity, we call it a steering committee, has to be established in the professional community. It can't be people from one single hospital if you want to create a national registry. It has to be from different places. And there needs to be a clear and acceptable regulations about data access. Who owns the data? Who can use the data for research? And I think it's very beneficial if you can create a network of professionals around the bariatric surgery. Using the word professional here is not only doctors, it's also dietitians, nurses, and so on. Transparency. Again, who owns the data? Who has access to the data? We publish most data, including complication rates, with hospital names nowadays. We didn't do it in the first report, but in all the other reports we have gone down to hospital level. So it's all open access, it's open to the public. It's on internet. And also again, who has access to the data for quality control in their own unit or for research? Every year we have an annual meeting where we invite all the users of the registry, that we discuss all these issues, and it's sort of a networking event. One thing that we thought a lot about when we started a registry is this issue of balancing a registry. You can have a complex registry with many variables, and you can have a simple registry with few variables. Well, complex registry, you have the chance of having high information value, but you may end up with low compliance. On the other side, if you have a simple registry, you have a chance of having a high compliance, but of course, you may end up with low information value. So you need to find the right balance here. How much can you register without getting a low compliance? It has to be user-friendly. Web-based, that's maybe obvious these days. It wasn't so obvious when we started. No paper, no Excel files that has to be filled in. The interface has to be easy. You need to use easy, robust definitions of variables. For example, diabetes. We have a yes or no answer. If the patient is on diabetes medication, yes. If there is no medication, no. Of course, we miss the diet treated diabetes, and we miss some information about the partial remission of diabetes, for example. But having a more complicated definition that is maybe medically more sound and so on, it creates a lot of time for the person who is doing the registry. It has to go back and look in the lab data or in old medical records to check for information that doesn't work in a registry. Easy access to the exact definitions of variables. It's in the interface. You just put the mouse pointer on the question and it pops up a window, and you have the definition of the variable. Hide unnecessary information. It's more that you don't have to see unnecessary questions. If you say that the patient doesn't have any complication, you don't have to see the list of the 15 different complications and so on. And we have the mandatory and desirable variables. This is one way to balance the registry, that everybody doesn't have to register everything. Easy access to data. I mean, people put a lot of effort to enter data, but you need to be able to get the data out. We do have a website where we publish all our annual reports and a lot of other information. Each hospital have always access to their own data, both in a number of automated reports, and they can get all their data out in an Excel file. We publish extensive annual reports, and all published research based on Zurich data can be found on our website. We have over 60 publications now where Zurich data have been used. One example from the registry for to having the information easily available, we have like a dashboard report that comes up every time you log into the registry. It's in Swedish, so you don't understand much of it, but I'm going to explain it. Here you see the number of operations completed within the last 6 months or 12 months or whatever the settings are. And you also see the percentage of registrations that are completed. Oh, this one is... Oh. Here you can see the follow-up rates for the last 12 months and for the previous year. So you can see that if you have improved or not. And we have follow-up times at 6 weeks, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, and 10 years. And here you get a green, yellow, or red for 7 defined quality indicators. So you can get an immediate picture of how well you are doing in the registration. Data quality is of course very important. These are the built-in functions that we have in the registry. We have built-in calculations of BMI and excess BMI loss and length of hospital stay. And it's impossible to enter illogical data, like the discharge date has to be after the operation date. And I mean, there are a lot of these logical functions that has to come in a certain order. And it's impossible to enter wrong data here. We have warnings for unusual data. For example, a systolic blood pressure over 180. You got a pop-up window and asking, are you sure that this is correct data? It's unusual, but can be correct. And we have a blockage of extreme, impossible data. If the weight is below 30 kg, well, that doesn't exist. Not among adults anyway. And validation of data. This is the second half of a registry. Without it, it doesn't work. It's mandatory to validate or register data. Like I said this morning, we have a nurse working full-time with data quality, systemic search for unusual data, systemic search for unusual combinations of data. An example of that would be if you have a laparoscopic primary surgery and have a hospital stay of more than 4 days without a complication. We think that's strange. You shouldn't have that. So we check for all, we can look up all these patients and check them and see if that's really correct. Either they have put in the wrong discharge date or they have missed a complication, usually. And in Sweden we are very fortunate because we can cross-run with other registries. It's still legal to do that, especially with the Swedish Population Registry and Causes of Death Registry. A little bit about the random comparison of patients' records with the database. We do that on a regular basis. Oh, here it is. About 10 to 20% of patients are randomly chosen. We check all major variables and we categorize the errors as minor or major. A minor error would be, for example, a 5 kg difference on the weight. A major error would be that you have missed a bleeding complication that required an operation. And these results of the audits are published in an annual report with the name of each hospital. And we've been able to fulfill about three rounds on each hospital in Sweden now. About the future? A quality register is never complete. It will always develop, it will always change. We have new operating methods coming up that needs to be added to the register. We have new follow-up variables that comes up, and there are new things we want to look at, and so on. The possibilities for the future, I've written automated data transfer. What I mean here is that all our medical records are on the computer nowadays. And there is a lot of information there in different systems. And if the information is systematically stored, it can be transferred to the quality register. We have actually started this process, and this year we hope to have an automatic transfer of all laboratory data from a national database into the register. You have the possibility of combining registers, if that's legal. And another possibility for research is to do the register-based randomized controlled trial. We have completed one, and we are in our second randomized controlled trial right now. And I can talk about that for a long time. It's very interesting. The problems, though, in the future, I haven't talked very much about economy, but here it comes. It costs money to develop a register, and it costs money to run it. That's one problem. Administrators trying to take over. I mean, we have all these management system, value-based healthcare or some other less intelligent systems that administrators try to force upon us. And these people, they see that these registers have a lot of interesting information, and they want it. They want to implement these data in their own models, and they want to take over the registries. And they have money, some of them, and power. They want to take over. But I would say the day the profession leaves the register is dead. If the administrators take over, forget it. The other future problem is new legislation. I mean, there may be laws that would prohibit us to transfer data from the medical records to the register, or you need, I mean, it was this close, actually, that the European Union, when they passed the GDPR law, it was this close that they passed a law that would have required us to have written informed consent, not only to enter data in the registry, but to use the register for a research project. And for each new project, you would have a new written informed consent. It was very close that it was passed. Luckily, it didn't. I was asked to say a few things about the GDPR. Something we have to be concerned about. What data is covered by the GDPR? Can we transfer medical data to the IFSO Global Register? Do we need to have each patient's informed consent? Well, Manuela provided me with an answer from lawyers that IFSO are in contact with. The first sentence sounds like this: in principle, medical data may not be processed. It doesn't sound very good, does it? Oh. Well, no. Oh, we can take both of them. In this case, we wonder if data that is processed actually qualifies as personal medical data, as mentioned in the GDPR. If medical data is completely anonymous, it is allowed, and the GDPR is not applicable on the processing. That sounds much better, right? But if the personal data or information can be traced back to an individual, it is not considered anonymous under the GDPR. And how do we deal with this? Because if you have a patient's operating date, you have the birth date, you have the height and the length, the height and the weight and the BMI. If you have a computer with a lot of power and you have access to databases legally or illegally, you can very easily trace the patient back. So how to make data completely anonymous? This is my own view. I have asked 2 hospital lawyers in Sweden about it, and they agree with me, but I have no written statement from them. I just asked them over the coffee table. Obviously, patient name, hospital number, social security number, or whatever has to be deleted. Is that enough? No. Data can be traced back, like I said, if you have the date of birth, date of operation. Well, if we take the date and month of birthday, operating date, and follow-up date, that can be deleted. And we only provide a year, or we change the month and the day, yeah. Well, numbers that are specific can be traced back. We have to be aware of that. For example, if you have a height of 167.3 centimeters and a weight of 125.2 kg, the BMI will be 44.73139547.3. And that figure is very specific. Not very many patients will have the same BMI with all these figures. So if we have these kind of data in our databases, it can be traced back. So we need to be very careful with what data we provide. And I think if we use a minimal number of figures, for example, whole numbers, I think we should be safe. Enough, yes. Conclusion. Consensus from the profession is necessary. Easy, robust definitions of variables. Easy to enter data and to retrieve data. Transparency. Okay, did I forget something? Oh, validation of data and quality control. Okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Let's move to the next one. That is Professor Ronald Lyon from Netherlands. Is there a benefit to involving our patients? Before to go to the presentation, you can send questions to us. It's just you can do writing in the website. You are with us, and we will receive here. Let me check if we have so far anyone. No, just talking about the quality of the picture, but no scientific questions so far, Ronald. Thank you.
Thank you, Almino. So, easy job then. I must confess, I'm not a professor. I'm just a surgeon. I was asked by the committee to elaborate a little bit how to involve our patients, and that's what I'm going to do in the coming 50 minutes. These are my disclosures. For this meeting, I have no conflicts of interest in my portfolio. So, first, why do we measure outcomes? The previous speakers have already mentioned a lot of reasons. I have a small summary. And then I want to talk about pros and proms in bariatric surgery and some future perspectives on that matter. In my opinion, it's quite easy. We measure outcome to learn what we do, to improve our performance, to better our outcomes, to establish reimbursement. And I know Johan is not a great fan, but nowadays we can't avoid completely the value-based healthcare doctrine. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on that. Origins of value-based healthcare was in Boston. Michael Porter, I used to study economics before my medical school, and even in 1989 I had already a book from Michael Porter, and it was about the strength in marketing and managing, and his philosophy worked a little bit out in economics, and he turned over to healthcare and tried to implement his thinking in healthcare, and he came up with this book. And summarized, it delivers this value agenda, and it says that if you organize your care into integrated units, you measure your outcomes, you arrange a bundle payment with the payers, you can come up with excellent care, improve and expand your geography where you can do your business. And you need some IT platform to manage that all. So what do we measure to come up with these values of our care? Of course, much is said already by Francois and Johan. It's all about clinical outcome, the acute complications, symptom severity, our disease control and survival. But the recent years, we came to the conclusion that patient-reported outcome must be included also, and that's about function in work, in love, in play, health-related quality of life, also in health, in work, in love, in play, adherence to the treatments and the perceived value of the treatment by the patient. And these are measures we have difficulty yet to measure. Oh. So, if you look at pros, the vocabulary in the world is very inconsistent, and no general agreement exists on what exactly a pro is or what it's not. And there are a lot of models proposed, as mentioned on the left side, and Wilson and Cleary integrated all these visions into their model. And it's all about symptom status, functional status, general health perceptions, characterized by the individual and also by the environment. And if you take that all together, then you come up with an overall quality of life. So just as a example, if you just look at symptom status, you're talking about things like pain or fatigue or incontinence. And if you transfer that to functional status, you're more talking about how patients or people dress, can walk, their ability to work, everyday living. And if you take that into account together, then you come up with a health-related quality of life, and that's always a combination of all these factors. And that then you will have the overall quality of life. What is very important that health behaviors and patient satisfactions are not pros. So those are separate entities. So you should not take them into account if you speak about pro. So what are PROMs? PROMs are the tools with which you turn qualitative measures into quantitative data. So you have your patient-reported outcome domains, and then you have the PROM, and that will give you some kind of score. So it turns the pro into quantitative data, and that's necessary because you want to compare the outcomes of one patient to the other. So the PROM field is mostly focused on scales. I think these forms will be very familiar. However, PROMs can be any method with which the patient's input is obtained. So if you use a questionnaire or an analog scale or a diary or even wearables, all the data that is generated by these methods can give you PROMs. But there are a lot of PROMs, and they all serve a specific need. So you have domain-specific PROMs, disease-specific PROMs, and generic PROMs. And the difference is that the domain-specific PROMs are very narrow. So the comprehensiveness is very small, but they are very in-depth. The disease-specific PROMs are in between, and the generic PROMs, SF36, RAND36, EQ5D, the PROMs we use very often are very broad, but have low precision. So you have to think beforehand, what exactly do I need? As said, if you have a domain-specific PROM, you have high precision, but assessment burden is very low. If you have disease-specific PROMs, you have high acceptability and is clinical relevant, but it's difficult to make comparison in the general population. And you have also a restricted focus. And if you have a big generic PROM, it measures health-related quality of life very well, but it is less sensitive and has a measurement bias in itself and is less responsive to clinical important changes. So you have to take that into account as well. So historically, PRO and PROMs have played important roles in three areas. Of course, research, and the main topics were drug labeling, RCTs, effectiveness research, and the generation of guidelines. The patient-physician relationship, the results of the PROMs were very important for communicating with the patients, for screening, for shared decision-making, empowerment of your patient, and also to follow compliance and concordance. And also in quality improvement, it is very important, especially the performance measurements the monitoring, and also if you look at costs. So the ideal PROM is determined by specific needs and goals. Am I looking for domain-specific results, disease-specific results, or more generic results? So what about PROMs in bariatric and metabolic surgery? There are a lot. In a recent systematic review, 49 different PROMs were identified used in bariatric and metabolic surgery. So what should we do with all those? All these kind of PROMs are available, but the wide variety of these generic and disease-specific PROMs make meta-analysis and interpretation across studies very difficult. So we said earlier we want to compare apples with apples, but it is very much impossible if you have so many different outcomes reported by patients. So it's difficult to decide what treatments are best as perceived by the patients, and that hampers evidence-based clinical decision-making. So the ideal PROM in bariatric surgery is determined by specific needs and goals, as with every PROM. As a small example, and we're not alone, because in the Netherlands we used up till now the RAND36 score. It's comparable to SF36. It's reported 125 times in publications, used as the major PROM in bariatric surgery. The second in line is the Barros. It's mentioned 60 times, and then from that on, it goes down very quickly. So SF36, RAND36 is the most used PROM. It looks very nice, but if you look in depth, it only gives some discrimination in physical functioning after 2 years, but it doesn't say anything about general health status after 2 years. So it's too generic. We don't know exactly what we're doing with our treatments if you use such a generic PROM. Claire de Vries and the Amsterdam team, together with the Bristol team and Stanford, conducted a systematic review. It was published last year in Obesity Reviews, and it took all these 49 available PROMs into account. And they tried to judge the quality of all these PROMs using the Cosman method, and they come up with recommendations what PROM to use and what PROM not to use based on quality characteristics of all these PROMs. They searched over 4,000 articles, and after psychometric validation, they identified 24 PROMs that were eligible for analysis. And as you can see, the domains covered in all these PROMs are quite various. So over here you see all the domains, and these are the different PROMs: body Q, Barros, M-equal, all the well-known Geekly, EQ5D, the last very few. And if you look at the judgment after their validation process, internal consistency is quite good overall, but if you look in the other measurement levels, you see a lot of poors and fairs. So they conclude that there is no PROM available to date that covers all requirements to suffice as a dedicated PROM for bariatric and metabolic surgery. There are a couple that grade level B. Those are promising PROM, but they need more work done to them to become a level A PROM. And there are a lot of PROMs that don't meet the required standards to function as a proper measurement tool in bariatric surgery. So, where should we go from here? one prompt to rule them all. That would be great. But we need to cross-reference or be able to cross-reference on a global reporting scale. So even if there are more than one PROM, we should be able to compare those different PROMs. Got some difficulty here. So we need standardized metrics. Even if you have different PROMs, if you have standardized metrics, they become comparable. There are already some possibilities to do so. But we must keep in mind that outcome domains must be selected first, and then we come up with the PROMs. And the PROMs need to be adaptable. So already there are a lot of new tools on the way to collect pro data. All tools already available need to be optimized, preferably also shortened and improved. And new methods must actively be developed to come up with the necessary tools we need to measure patient-reported outcome and to be comparable. As Jon also said, crosswalks between instruments are increasingly available also in PROM, not only in clinical outcome. So, to conclude, must we involve the patient? Yes, absolutely. We must measure PROM in bariatric and metabolic surgery. It is, of course, what matters most to the patient. Not only clinical outcome in our perspective is important, but also what it matters to the patient. It says something about quality of life. It gives some value to our treatments. It will help you get your treatments reimbursed, but most importantly, if we speak the same language, we use the same measurements, that will be able to research that and benchmark ourselves also on patient-reported outcome. To facilitate this, I want to mention our initiative. It's not just a Dutch initiative, it's the initiative also involved the people of the recent systematic review. As said in the talk, there is no PROM available at the moment having all requirements. There are a couple that need some restructuring to become a level A PROM, and the body Q was one of those level B recommended PROMs, and we're actually rewriting the body Q. And we want to talk about that on the 2nd of September in Amsterdam. A lot of people already involved in this important work are already invited for an expert meeting, and there are still a couple of places available. So if you want to be part of this initiative, please get into contact with us, and we'll see you gladly in Amsterdam the Monday before the Madrid Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all our speakers. That was a really very, very interesting session looking at why IFSO might be looking at registries, how we can set them up, what we need to do to maintain them, and involving our patients. We have a number of questions coming through online, and I might just start with the first one, which is from Sharon Kazrinsky. And the question is, if the data is made anonymous, how can you follow them up after surgery? So I guess, Johan, do you want to answer that? If the data is made anonymous, how are we able to follow them up after surgery?
Well, it's impossible.
Yeah, so basically the answer is that it's impossible. And
I'd like to make a comment.
Yeah, sure.
Not about this, but
Okay. Yeah, sure.
I'd like to. Well, I'd like to make a comment on our whole session, our whole day today. That I don't remember who mentioned on research. I think Almino, And this is a wake-up call for everybody who's listening to that. We are all enthusiastic here. That's why we came from all different parts of the world to attend here, this meeting and broadcast this session. But registers in bariatric surgery or any specialty do not replace research, the basic research to know how the operations work, the real outcomes, because we have to undergo safety, efficacy, and the summit of level 1A of evidence and recommendation that are randomized control trials. So please do not mix that. If you have your operation and you put it on a registry, it doesn't mean that it has to be accepted worldwide because you just fill up some columns. This does not replace research. This does not replace basic science, as François Patou does, and Ron does the operations in an RCT, I do, Almino do, Wendy does, all of us sitting here do. So please do not mix this. Registries are for approved traditional procedures, and any modification should undergo, or new procedures or device-based like endoscopy or everything else, should undergo all the steps that are mandatory for any medical intervention to be approved. So I think this should be made very clear that it does not replace this. Ron?
I have the answer to the question.
Okay, and
Do as we do in the Netherlands. We resubmit every year all our data, even the historical one. So if we submit it in 2017, our data is destroyed after being handled by IFSO. And then the next year, we resubmit all our data, but then you have your follow-up connected to the de-identified patient.
so I think that goes a bit back to what Ricardo is saying, is that a registry, and when we hold the data internationally, it does need to be de-identified, but sitting behind it needs to be a very robust database that probably is identified and probably also may include a lot more data points and may include, you know, even information from trials. But what we're looking at doing with an international collaboration or at a registry level is more of a snapshot that might give us an idea of what we need to spend more time researching into to get the true answer. Do you think that's fair to say?
And another point that about informed consent, we in Brazil, we have a large country, a huge country, the second largest volume of surgery in the world in bariatric surgery. And we do have to have signed informed consents. So what we do is to have people that is dedicated to that. We have a research coordinator with her assistants that go for the informed consent and come back to the computer and database with the signed informed consent, because this is the law in Brazil. We cannot share patients' information into the database without their consent. So it's a pain of doing this, but it's not an obstacle. You should pursue this, and if you're in your country, it's mandatory. Go for it. Do not give up because it's feasible.
Great. Mahan?
This is a very important point for those who are designing a registry. In that if your registry purely is for outcome related to your institution or your region or your country, it does not require patient consent. But if your registry is also going to support research, you do need the consent. And so all our patients in Ontario have to sign a consent. About 1% do not, because they do not want their data to be used for research purposes, which is rather unusual to see this, but you do see some patients just don't want to do that. But that gives us the opportunity to actually share that data for research purposes, and by signing that consent, they've agreed to that. So like Ricardo, we actually get our patients to sign consent because it gives us that freedom.
In Australia and New Zealand, we use an opt-out consent process, which under GDPR I don't think is actually allowed. But the recommendation of our government and our highest research body is that we do that because it improves the percentage of people who agree to participate. Johan?
According to the GDPR, there is the opt-in or opt-out options, and you're talking about opt-in, which is an informed consent that you have to sign. Opt-out is that you are informed that you will be in a register unless you say that you will not be. So that's what we have.
So is that accepted in GDPR?
That's accepted according to the GDPR, yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
And you can conduct research on that database?
Yes.
because it was interesting. It was actually the Canadian Stroke Registry that first demonstrated that if you move from an opt-in process, where about 60% of people will bother to read the form and return it, and so they're on the first pass, so it leads a lot more effort, I guess, to get up to that higher level. When they moved from the opt-in to an opt-out, they went from 60% participation to 95% participation, and it completely changed their outcome measures. What they thought they were getting with stroke management was completely different. So I think that also then speaks back to the point that all of the speakers have talked about, is the importance of good data, defining data well, making sure that we acquire as much of the data as possible of our chosen population, and also making sure that we collect the data and store it responsibly. And so there is a question about data from Marcus Moa. The remark was, the second presenter made it clear that one of the key issues for data collection is to understand what data is, i.e. what weight is, how weight can be defined. Is it initial weight, immediate weight, weight under conservative treatment until surgery? They also comment that we need to know what we're talking about in kilograms, stones, pounds, etc., and all other variables. And they reference a conference that defined sepsis back in 1991. I think this probably speaks to a project that Ronald's been leading, where we are actually trying to get an international consensus on what these data fields should look like in bariatric surgery. I don't know, Ronald, if you want to talk a bit about the data dictionary project that you've been undertaking.
I asked all the representatives of registries around IFSO World to share their data dictionary, to come up with a comparison as a first step to generate a core outcome set that would be helpful for the IFSO Global Registry, and maybe also for starting countries to come up with a national registry. Unfortunately, I have 7 data dictionaries now in my possession, and there are almost 36 established national registries. So if people listen, please do contact me and provide us with your data dictionary. And in Madrid, I hope to be able to present the comparisons.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the floor or the moderators? Any more questions from our online audience?
We have here a question from Miguel.
So there's another one. There's currently many hospitals and country-based registries with different variables. It would be highly valuable, an initiative to standardise the content of bariatric registries. I don't think you'd find anyone would disagree with that comment in this room. This is something we've spent the day discussing, about how we can standardise what we're doing. And I think we also have to recognise that registries are at different stages of evolution around the world. There's some very established and very complete registries, such as the Scandinavian, the British, the Dutch registries, the Michigan Initiative, Ottawa, other areas. But then there's also registries that are just starting, so they only have, maybe 10% of the population they're capturing, and then there's others that are sort of on their way to trying to aspire to be what some of the more established registries have already achieved. So when we look at what we're doing, we need to be able to stratify by understanding what percentage of the population people are actually reporting on, because that gives us an idea of the likely reliability of that data. But we also should be able to piggyback off some of these people who've gone before us and learn from them, and maybe take the opportunity for those of us who are trying to get better to use their experience to achieve that a bit more quickly, maybe accelerate the process for newer societies. So that's one thing that the committee is working on, is developing a core set of outcome measures that are well-defined, reliable, and able to be collected and compared internationally, that all registries may be able to adopt, and at least have that within their embedded set. They may choose to have lots of other ones as well, but at least collect those ones reliably, according to this data dictionary that we hope to develop.
We have some comments here from Marcus Moore and Miguel here from Mexico, talking exactly about the difficult about to analyze different aspects of the registry, and they are suggesting that we look for some uniformization of the data that will be submitted and analyzed.
Yeah, I think we would all agree very much with that.
Also, I'd like to make a point, particularly those countries that are thinking of starting a registry of some sort. Please know that the rest of the world who are ahead of you are here to help you. People who have done this before will tell you perhaps some shortcuts, some steps, some pathways to get you started. So don't hold back. Ask us, ask any of your colleagues. We are here to help you.
Absolutely.
So probably we have a lot of colleagues that are with us in this moment and in different places, office, hospital, home. And they are not registering right now. They are thinking about what we can tell them, Wendy. What's the real advantage about to participate in a registry program as the program we are working in IFSO? What benefit they will have?
I think there's a number of benefits to participation in registry. I think at a local level, having a registry is really important because it will help to address the problems that are important to your community, to your society, and to your patient population. And I think also that doesn't deride the need for research either, because research will also often arise from registries, but it may also inform the need for a registry. But at an international level, I think the registry can bring us together as a community. It can help to bond us together, giving us a shared purpose around what we see as important. But it also gives us potentially the power to see trends more quickly, to see if a procedure is performing as we suspect. Often when drugs go through approval to go to the market, they go through phase 1, 2 and 3 clinical trials, and then they undertake post-market surveillance. An international registry may give us the opportunity, if we work together carefully and well with good data, to do a similar thing for our bariatric surgery procedures post-approval, where we can see how they perform in the real world. So I think there's a lot of exciting possibilities for an international collaboration, but sitting behind that needs to be a strong national registry that is providing the very best data possible, and sitting behind that, again, needs to be a group of really dedicated clinicians who are really willing to put the work in to do this for their patients.
I think we can move from the second part, no?
Yeah, I think we can move to Sir Richard's.
Yeah. So we finished this first module, and we will start just now the second one. And our first presenter will be Dr. Richard Welburn. Looking to the future. No, this is when the IFSO registry achievements to date. So Richard, what kind of achievements have you done in these years?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I'm just walking around to see if you can see the slides, which, yes, you can, because you've kindly zoomed in on the slides. So it's a pleasure to present the data for what IFSO has achieved so far. So if I may, I'm going to go back to 2014, when President Angrisani wrote a letter on behalf of the executive of IFSO to all the member countries, inviting them to submit data. And at that stage, we established aims for the pilot IFSO project. First of all, was it possible to combine large and different local national databases? Could they be analysed? Can we establish basic demographic information? And can we generate research questions? So at that time, a steering committee was convened. Michel Gagnier was the director, and the committee consisted of colleagues in Dendrite, which was the software computer company who funded the project, Ingmar Naslund and Johan Ottesen from the SOREG, and myself, and a founding charter was put forward determining the governance of the data. And I'm going to present to you some of the data from that. So 48 invitations were sent to 6 continents, and from that, 25 units, as you can see at the bottom left, from 18 countries submitted data successfully. And this was the first report. So we had some 100,000 anonymized patient records uploaded, 25 contributors from 18 different countries, and you can see the contributors and the numbers there on the left. So we generated obvious information such as the type of operation that was being done throughout the different countries, and so far this was exactly the same, replicating the information from the bariatric surgery worldwide surveys which Dr. Angrisani and before him Dr. Scopanaro and Buchwald had done over the years. But what made it different was that we were able to look in a more granular way at each individual patient's comorbidities. So here for the first time we were able to demonstrate differences in country or contributor prevalence of type 2 diabetes and other diseases. And you can see very clearly that China has a very large prevalence of type 2 diabetes in the male patients being operated on, so there are clear differences. And this was the first time that we were able to show this on an international scale. We were also able to generate a risk stratification, and at the time this is the OS-MRS score, and I had always had the feeling that in the UK we were operating on much higher risk patients than some other colleagues, and in fact that appears to be vindicated with the highest OS-MRS score shown in that analysis. So the aims of the global registry, it was possible to achieve all of them. Yes, we could combine large databases, and things moved on from there to by IFSO. I'm sorry, the pointer isn't working. The clicker isn't working. Here we are. So the next president, Professor Weiner, and the IFSO executive board decided that yes, this was a project that was worth continuing with, and he therefore convened a further advisory board, expanding the members to Drs. Higa, Drs. Ramos, van Wagenveld, and Professor Weiner and Nathan Zundel. And a further charter was updated in December 2015, determining the use of the registry. I'm sorry, the pointer doesn't appear to be working. It's very slow. Professor Weiner here, writing, this is the second time we've seen this slide today, writing to all the members around the world, inviting them to submit data. And here is another letter then from the next president, Dr. Zundel. And so it continues again. Aims of the registry had moved to establishing basic demographic characteristics for patients operated in different countries and to record basic one-year post-op data as far as the data could show. So a second report was published on the left, a third report was published on the right, and then the fourth report was published in 2018, and I'm going to show you data from that report now. So again, the fourth iteration of the registry, the aims are exactly the same as before, to describe demographics of the operated population from the year 2014 onwards and report one-year outcomes within the limitations of the data. So this slide shows the growth of the registry with 100,000 patients from 18 countries at the top in iteration 1, down to 394,000 from 51 countries in the fourth report. And these are the data I'm going to show you. So this is the fourth report data. The contributors are shown on the left. The data in bold indicate information sent from national registries. There are 550 hospitals, 14 national registries, 5 continents, 51 countries, and 394,000 individual operation records. And here we can see very clearly the different types of operation being done. This is very similar again to the information from Dr. Angrisani in his latest bariatric surgery worldwide. But remember, that data is published, is estimated from, well, often it's guesswork, and usually it's not come from individual patient records. But remember, every single patient here is an individual patient record. So here you can clearly see different operations being done worldwide. And if we look at the denominator, we think that we got about 7.5% of all operations. So this isn't all-encompassing. It is a process through which we're going, and we hope that within a few years' time we'll have all the world's operations in this database. And I'm sorry, the presser, I'm trying to move the slide. Here we are. So if we look at BMI by country, there are huge differences, and these are unexpected. There are some places that operate on only younger patients or lower BMIs, but you see there's a huge range. So we looked at these for patients who, countries that were operating on at least 1,000 patients, so we hope that they would be representative of the country's activity. And here we can see in China the average BMI is 37 and 44 in Saudi Arabia. So there are clearly huge differences on who we're actually operating on. And if you look at the age, similarly, Saudi Arabia, okay, they operate on younger children, but nevertheless there are huge age ranges here, from people being 28 or early 30s in some of the countries shown on the left, down to people near 50 in some of the Western European countries. So big differences. Remember, each one of these is an individual patient. So I think this is very interesting. This is the different obesity-related diseases shown by the region and then by disease. So we have Western Europe here, Eastern Europe, North America, South America, Middle East, and Asia. And if you look to the right, looking along the x-axis, this shows you how prevalent the diseases are. But what's actually even more interesting is to look at it, the same data, the other way around, and that is to look at the individual diseases and to see in which continent they're more common in. So here we can clearly see if you have type 2 diabetes, you're more likely to have that if you're being operated in Asia. Dyslipidemia, very common in Eastern Europe. I'm not quite sure what that means, but if you look at musculoskeletal pain here, it's very commonly very likely to be prevalent in Western Europe, probably because the age and the BMI in Western Europe is higher than in the rest of the countries analysed. Again, if you look at the OS-MRS here, huge differences. Q8, luckily, operating on very low-risk patients. There are much higher-risk patients here as we go down the graph. And it would be interesting in future iterations to look at private versus public to see if that makes a difference. So, looking at that in slightly more detail here, I'm sorry the slides are going through by themselves. So here we have some BMI distributions between sampled countries. Here you have, if you're Indian, you're more likely to have a BMI between 30 to 35 to 40. If you're in Sweden, it's more likely to be around 40 to 45. If you're in the UK, it's more likely to be to the right as well. So these are different operated populations. And if you look at the age distributions, again, you see similar differences. If you're Chinese, you're more likely to be operated on if you're 26 to 30. And similarly, there's a right shift as you go from Israel to the UK. Now, this is really interesting. As far as I'm aware, this is the first worldwide cumulative data looking at post-operative discharge and stay in hospital. This is a proxy for quality, as Johan Ottosson has already mentioned, and there are clear differences. I think if we're trying to sell bariatric surgery as a good treatment for obesity and severe obesity-related disease, we need to be able to show there is efficient surgery and that hospital stay is therefore short. And if you use hospital stays longer than 4 or 5 days as a proxy for complications, you can see that this may be interesting to look at between different countries in the future. Okay, so here the data get more interesting, but also slightly more difficult to interpret. This is weight loss looking at 1 year by pre-surgery BMI, and it appears that if you have a Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, you're going to lose more weight than if you have sleeve gastrectomy, but there is some bias in terms of the follow-up here, because the follow-up rates for gastric bypass aren't brilliant, and they're worse for sleeve gastrectomy, and it's written in the report if you actually want to look at the data. But this is a slide which I think is really, really interesting. Although the follow-up proportion isn't anything like 100%, this slide shows that the recovery from diabetes, depending on the weight loss, if you've had a gastric bypass on the left and if you've had a sleeve gastrectomy on the right. So even if you say that there is selection bias in these patients being followed up, and even if you say that the data aren't being independently entered, which clearly there won't be in many of the submitting registries and countries, it does appear to be clear that the more weight you lose after a Rodenweiss gastric bypass, the more likely you are to be recovered from diabetes, and also similarly, but perhaps less obviously, with the sleeve gastrectomy. And I don't think, I'm very interested in people's views on that, but I think this is really, really interesting information on some 10,000 patients, that the more weight loss you have with a gastric bypass or a sleeve, the more likely you are to recover from your diabetes. I'm sorry, can I go back to the main slides, please? Want to go back to that one. I don't know what's happened then, sorry. Apologies. Thank you. So to go through some of the data limitations as have already been alluded to, we know that we have incomplete case ascertainment. We've gone up from about 2 or 3% to 7.5% of the patients worldwide. And I think already you can see some clear trends developing. About 63% of the baseline records were complete, so there is a substantial proportion of patients who have missing data and incomplete data. We haven't made any attempt to look at mortality or post-operative complications because we don't know the validity of the mortality data or the complications data. And there's also unknown selection bias and follow-up, as we mentioned, with poor follow-up rates, 1/3 for weight loss and 1/5 the type 2 diabetes status at 1 year. And at 2 years, both have follow-up rates of less than 10%. And that's clearly something that we can't actually analyse because it's statistically meaningless. And last, as Dr. Otterson mentions again and again and again, we have unknown data validation, but we are a step in the right direction to knowing what happens worldwide. And the data have shown some interest. We published a second report as a paper in obesity surgery a year ago, and with only a few months, it's already attracted some 39 citations as of a couple of weeks ago. As of 2 days ago. And the latest report has only been published a few weeks and has already been cited 4 times and downloaded over 1,000 times. So I think this demonstrates that there is interest around the world to get this initiative going, to keep it going, and to show the world how we're treating this epidemic of obesity. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we are approaching to the last presentation, and right now will be Wendy Brown, that is the chair of the Registry Committee of IFSO, with looking to the future of IFSO Registry. Wendy.
Thank you, and thank you, Almino, for bringing together this first international meeting looking at registries. So I've been tasked with looking to the future of the IFSO registry, and a lot of this has been covered as we've gone through the program today, and I hope that perhaps I can tie it a little together. These are my disclosures. So as Richard has eloquently discussed, we've just last year had our 4th report from the IFSO registry, and we now have just under 400,000 operation reports from 51 countries across 5 continents. 42% are Rowan-Wye gastric bypass, about 33% sleeve gastrectomy, 12% gastric banding operations, and 5% being 1 anastomosis gastric bypass. So an increasing number of records are being included, and it demonstrates the diversity of the procedures that are being performed around the world. When we think about the types of registries that are out there, a registry at the end of the day is just a conglomeration of data, but broadly we can classify them as being condition-based or disease-based registries which collect diagnostic information on those patients with specific diseases or conditions, and they can be used to monitor diseases and look at trends. Another type of registry can be a device or a drug or a product registry that monitor the medium to long-term safety of these devices, drugs or procedures. And finally, we have what we call clinical quality registries, which monitor outcomes and report on the quality of care. distinct to the other two types, clinical quality registries really rely on near total population data collection so that you can look at these predefined clinically important outcome measures that relate back to quality, what we believe to be good reflections of quality. Those outcomes can then be analysed and risk adjusted, and they can be meaningfully compared. The current, our IFSO registry really falls at the moment into the condition or disease-based registries, in that we get very nice demographic information about what's going on around bariatric surgery in those patients who are from those populations that are currently included in the registry. And there's a little bit of data, but not a lot, on the clinical quality registries. There's subsets within the IFSO registry that can give us clinical quality data, such as those Scandinavian registries, the Dutch registry, the British registry, the Michigan initiative. Those kind of registries can give us, or those data sets can give us clinical quality registry information, because they do have that high level of case acquisition. But on the whole, at the moment, really what we're getting from the IFSO registry is information about the disease of obesity and bariatric surgery as its treatment. There have been some real and clear achievements of the IFSO Global Registry. It's a very short time frame that it's been working on. And I think some of the real strengths of the registry has been that we've been able to see, even with relatively low case acquisition, some interesting country-to-country variations. And Richard's already mentioned most of these, but BMI pre-surgery is much lower in South Korea than it is in Germany, for example. Those in Georgia, about 50% female, 50% male in Georgia, but 100% female in South Korea. Roux-en-Y gastric bypass is by far and away the most popular in Mexico, Colombia and Brazil, whereas sleeve gastrectomy is far more popular apparently in Australia, Saudi Arabia and Guadeloupe. But there are limitations, as Richard's already mentioned, and the current limitations really come down to data acquisition and the centres that are representing different countries. So, for example, many countries are represented by a single centre. In Australia, we have a national registry, which at the moment we have about 70% case acquisition. And in our national registry, the proportion of laparoscopic sleeve gastrectomy is 70%. Whereas in the IFSO Global Registry, it's suggested from a single centre that does contribute to the Global Registry that it's 100%. So if you were to read the Global Registry, you'd get the wrong idea of what's actually going on across Australia. We currently have no rules around data completeness or audit to ensure that we are getting all the data. So the question becomes, are people cherry picking the data that they're providing to the Global Registry to make themselves look better or their society look better? Whilst we do have a data dictionary that underpins the Global Registry, we find that data is not consistently defined or captured across the participating sites. So again, we come back to, are we comparing like for like? And one example is the definition of diabetes and how that's defined across the world. Some people talk about diabetes, some registries talk just about type 2 diabetes, and these all get lumped together in the registry at the moment. And all of these things mean that our data is at very high risk of bias. And one example of this is, according to the IFSO Global Registry, 19.8% of patients were on medication for type 2 diabetes. But if you look at the inter-country variation from 4.5 to 97.7%, you have to suspect that there's a huge risk of bias in that reported number. Those limitations aside, I do believe that the current registry is providing us with a very strong foundation for a even more robust future. The current registry collects a large number of data points, and whilst that large number may not be sustainable as we continue to grow, from what we've learned over the last 4 reports, we're starting to see which elements are reliably reported and which elements are able to be well defined. We've also had the opportunity to get feedback from the profession about which elements are useful. So because of the current data set with its limitations, it's really given us great foundations to understand how we can move forward. And I don't think the next iteration will be the final iteration. I believe that this is a process that will continue to evolve as time goes on. So we're at the point now where we need to look at that data set that we have and define from it a core data set that's meaningful, that's well defined and is reliably collected internationally. And we also need to look carefully at the methodology that we can adopt potentially across other societies. So this current data set gives us the opportunity to look at what elements function well, to define them as best we can, and then to look at the methodology by which we collect them and make a protocol that we can then provide to other societies that wish to establish a registry. We also do need, as part of that, to put in place audit and data completeness rules. So I think the key considerations for us as we continue to grow the registry is first of all to relook at that statement of purpose. As Richard said, each time there's been a report, the committee has focused on what are we trying to get out of this, what's our purpose, what can we achieve. And I think that's where we're at again, and there's been the point of a discussion of the committee at our meeting today. I think what we'd like to do is to be able to provide reliable, transparent data that is really the go-to for the international community. We'd like to say that our international collaboration provides the data that the rest of the world looks to inform their decision-making when they're looking at what they'd like to do about bariatric surgery, or they have a question about bariatric surgery. So we need to think about what the purpose for our collaboration is, and I think at the moment we agree that really descriptive data is where our strengths are at the moment, being able to describe trends, and we'll be able to do that even better as we get better quality data into the registry. But over time we'd like to evolve so that we can start to describe some outcome measures, which ultimately should include patient-reported outcome measures. But we'd also like to be able to provide, even if it's within a subset of the registry, the opportunity for some post-approval or post-market surveillance of bariatric procedures. Once we understand our purpose, we can define what our outcome measures are that will inform that purpose. And those outcome measures will need to be able to be defined internationally, be meaningfully compared, and be collected with the same methodology. And hopefully we'll be able to define 5 to 6 outcome measures, so a much leaner registry that hopefully, whilst it may not have the power of the national registries that are sitting behind it to ask lots of questions, will enable us to answer the questions we're asking really well. And then we need to look at the meta-axes of data that support that, so which populations we're looking at, where the data is being collected, and at what time points those data are being collected. And it may be that we are able to stratify some of the outputs of the registry so that we can have a sort of separate reporting for those registries with very high levels of data acquisition to those registries with lower levels of data acquisition. It may be that you are at that lower level of data acquisition because you're just starting out, or maybe you got started and it all sort of fell in a heap because your funding went away, or maybe there's been some other issues. But we hope that if we have a group that are collecting the data well, that becomes aspirational, and eventually all 65 societies are contributing at that higher level. Sorry, I've got the stuck button problem too. Because at the end of the day, good data is the key to useful reports. If you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. So we need to be sure that we have really good data that's going into this registry. Sitting behind that needs to be a robust national registry, and behind that again needs to be your own really robust individual data collection. And so we really need to go through this process probably on an annual basis, making sure we know why we're doing, what we're doing to achieve it, how we're doing it, to be sure that we know that what we're collecting is right, that the data is valid, that we're holding it responsibility, and we're analysing the data and reporting back to the profession, but not just the profession, but other stakeholders such as payers, patients, medical defence organisations. The list is endless, who may find these data useful, and we need to be sure we're engaging with them to ensure we make that data as well used as possible. So I think effective collaboration needs planning and consistency. So we need to, as we look forward to the registry, the future of the registry, I think we're at the point now where we all agree that we need to have really robust, standardised data relating to well-defined outcome measures with clear data completeness rules, and that's really the bottom of our pyramid. To achieve a really good outcome from our registries, we need to make sure that we are engaging with all the stakeholders to make sure that the data we're collecting is useful, because if it's not useful, we're wasting our time. If nobody's reading our reports, then IFSO is wasting €60,000 a year with this type of activity. We do need to make sure that we have adequate resources for this, And it's possible that just relying on IFSO itself for funding into the future may not be feasible. And if we have the aspirations to achieve what we want to achieve, we're going to need a bigger funding pool. So these are things and challenges for the future that we don't have answers for today, but I think we need to be cognizant of them as we move forward, because if we're not, then we're setting ourselves up to fail. And overarching all of this, we need really robust governance. We need to make sure that we're complying with GDPR and ISO standards, and we need to start to build into it audit. That means that we may need to look at the construct of our current committee and make it a bit more broad-based, a bit more independent, and involve people with different expertise beyond surgery, such as biostatistics, economics, legal expertise, whatever it may be, that the registry needs to be sure that the people have confidence, that the community has confidence that what we're putting out there is as free from bias as possible. If we don't ensure we've got a proper framework, then there's a lot of risk. We can't compare our data meaningfully because of a high risk of bias, and there's a chance and a real fear that we could produce inaccurate or misleading conclusions, which would be a real pity for the surgical community and could really devastate our profession. If we don't have a proper framework, there's legal ramifications. GDPR holds IFSO, not Dendrite, responsible because we're the data controllers. Dendrite are our data processors, so all the legal responsibility falls back to us. By de-identifying data, we do mitigate risk, but as Johan's very carefully explained, and I think very eloquently explained, de-identification isn't just as simple as taking out names. We've got to make sure that, to the best of our ability, someone with a powerful computer can't re-identify that person. And that responsibility sits with us. So we have to make sure that our contributing groups or societies are de-identifying properly before they put the data in. And I think a real risk is if we don't ensure we have that proper framework, that ultimately we'll lose a lot of our contributors because they'll think it's not worth their time putting their precious data and their precious resource into our reports if our reports don't actually mean anything and don't change things. So this is going to require a lot of resource. I'm sorry, I've just skipped forward a bit there. Go. First of all, there's a lot of data to collect, and data collection is expensive, and this data chain is very expensive for us to undertake to make sure that we have that really good data that's going to underpin all that we do. Engaging with all our different stakeholders is also important, and it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to communicate to people what the value proposition for them, their society, their community might be in being included in our registry. There's a huge ethical framework, and each country, each participating society and each group will have a different ethical frameworks, from things such as consent to sharing data under privacy laws. All of those things need to be considered and thought through. And finally, because of this, that comes at a considerable cost. Sorry. Can you move the slide on for me? Oh, thank you. So as we look forward to our IFSO Global Registry, I think we have a really solid foundation, and I'm very grateful to all the people who've invested so much time and energy into getting the registry to where it is today. Without people like Richard Wellborn, who's been really invested in making sure that this dream becomes a reality, we wouldn't be in the strong position we are right now. So I think building on the success of that registry, the executive committee or the executive board has established a committee to plan future development. It's a very broad-based committee with representation from all the IFSO chapters. This committee is aiming to agree on the purpose, the core data elements and methodology by Madrid, and we've had a meeting today which has gone a long way to developing that vision, and we'll have a strategic plan and a business case to present to the executive board by Madrid so that it can be approved and presented to the membership. We believe that by developing this core data set and methodology that it will be useful for those societies that currently don't have registries, and it will hopefully help to streamline establishment in those countries. And again, I reiterate what others have already said. What Lillian has emphasised is that we hope that those societies with established registries can become a real resource for those countries that wish to get started, so that we can help to maybe accelerate their progress and learn from the mistakes we've made. And I'd just like to again acknowledge all of those people involved in the IFSO Registry Committee, with IFSO itself and Dendrite, and I have to acknowledge my colleagues in the Australian and New Zealand Registry who've done a lot of the background work and the methodology that I've presented today. So thank you very much.
So let me ask something for you, as we have different kinds of registry here. Let's imagine that you can change something in your program of registry. What do you should change right now? Or what do you can do better? That's the question in the program that you have right now.
In our case in the Netherlands, I think we have a well-established registry on clinical outcome, and our biggest challenge is to come up with a really dedicated patient-reported outcome measure. And I'm really looking forward to the events coming to come up with something that might be useful for everybody.
What do you think we can do with the registry in order to have the registry helping to have more follow-up?
I think that is one of the biggest challenges for everybody. We've seen the follow-up figures of Sweden. Those are, I think, terrific. I can match those numbers in the Netherlands, even that we are dedicated. It is very difficult to keep your patients connected when they're doing well and they have a procedure that does not need thorough follow-up. We do more and more sleeves. Patients after sleeves do not come back when they go good. So that is a difficulty. Maybe engaging your patients with ICT, email follow-up, will maybe improve our follow-up rates if people do not need to come physically to the clinic, but can be monitored from distance. That might be a game changer.
I agree with that you said about the new techniques. You do have applications for new phones that are on the market, and they can be changed so you can actually enter prom data and all sorts of, they can answer a lot of questions and so on in these phones. The problem is the measurements and the blood tests, but we'll see.
So imagine that we can have the patient with a bracelet. And by this bracelet, we can receive some information about temperature and pulse and cardiac rate of the patient. So we can do a very early diagnostic about complication. I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that a system like this can save a lot of lives, because we will be able to diagnose complication very, very, very early. I think that this is in the very future, is not for now. But when we think for the future of programs of registry, and we go to programs using machine learning and data and all of these issues that we have very early, I think this will be a revolution in the medical practice. But for you guys, what do you think that we could improve in your registry that you have right now?
I think proms, as Ronald said, is very important, because we know that we have a very, very low penetrance of bariatric and metabolic surgery worldwide. People are not, they do not follow up surgery because if we have 15% of weight regain, for example, they still think it's their fault, so they do not come back. So probably, Ronald, this is one on top of patients being well. When they do not well, they do not come back as well. So I think first we have to fight the stigma against obesity and diabetes. So the registries will help us a lot to bring back those patients that think they failed, because the society, not IFSO, the people society think that obesity is it's a behavioral thing, and it's not, it's a disease. So I think the registries, we will include PROMs. PROMs will tell us that patients, even if they regain weight, they still are better than pre-op. PROMs can give us that information. So I'll add PROMs, and I'll use the registries as a very powerful tool to decrease obesity and diabetes stigma and to make metabolic surgery great again. So make bariatric surgery great again. We have to recruit patients. We have to operate patients more and more and more that we're doing right now. And the registries are very helpful.
And how we can connect PROMs and registry?
That's a good thing. I'll have you the answer after Ron's meeting, because we're going to get together all the PROMs groups involved worldwide to reassess what are the questionnaires we have to use. We don't have to be so long, because long questionnaires, nobody answers. We have to be straightforward, short, low number of items, and then I'll give you the answer by Madrid, or at least we're going to start thinking exactly what we need to do regarding the language to be used and merge PROMs with medical outcomes.
Richard.
It's very interesting to look at the wearable device market. Sales of wearable devices are increasing exponentially throughout the world, and it's predicted that within 5 or 10 years, every single human being on the planet will wear some sort of medical device which will be capable of transmitting their health status to whoever you want to transmit it to. So if we follow on from Johan Ottesen's point about automated collection of data, this will potentially transform the way we collect data. So when we looked at the 394,000 patients in the 4th Global Registry report, thinking about how much time it would take each person's data to be collected, that includes interviewing the patient in the clinic room. Are you diabetic? Yes, no. Do you have hypertension? Yes, no. All the information, all the operation records, all the post-operative discharge stuff, that record alone would probably take one person 1 hour. So 394,000 patients extrapolated will take one person 45 years to enter all the data. So think how that could be transformed if we can all be done, or a substantial part of it done, all automatically. So the patient's wearable device transmits the data on their HbA1c and medications and insulin requirements straight to the hospital. That'll transform things in the next 10, 20 years. I have no doubt about it. Of course, if we can pay for it, which is a separate question.
I'm imagining the device and the patient's ready to eat, and the bracelet is, come on, are you sure that you are eating that? So it's controlling the habits of the patient.
No, you don't feel hungry, you've had a bypass, stop it.
Yes. You have to believe in the procedure. Miran, I think you have worked with both systems. How we can compare MBA Squip with the registry you have right now?
I think each registry is designed to address specific goals. Our registry in Ontario is designed not only to look at the clinical outcome, but also look at impact on the patient's longevity, work-related, and health economics. So the type of data we collect is very much allows us to do that. I also want to make mention that every patient is being captured by so many registries. It's not just a bariatric registry that captures a patient. In your country, in your province, or whatever, each patient is being captured. If they've got a family doctor, there's a family practice registry. If they've got diabetes, they're in a diabetic registry. definitely, if you have a public health system like us, it's in the health utilization. So if you link these registries together, you can get a much more complete picture than any one registry has. And so in an ideal world, you're asking, I would like a system where we actually have the capture of the patient in one data set, so you actually can draw on all these registries. Right now, we actually have to actively link our registry to our ISIS data, which is our health utilization data, so we know how patient after bariatric surgery, how often they go back to their doctors or consultants, or do they have any hip surgery or knee surgery, because our registry does collect it, but it's hit and miss. That one for sure, because it's our government knowing that the patient had this procedure and they paid the physician, the hospital was, so that captures it. So there are so many ways that actually data is being collected on each one of us, that if you can somehow link these, you will get a much more complete picture than on one registry alone. So my ideal world would be actually if you could actually in every jurisdiction, you link these registries to complete your own data set. And that's what our goal is actually. And we're doing some very effective research now that we are able to link. The problem is that every linkage is not cheap. To try and link registries together, you're talking millions of data sets from between registries, it's not cheap.
Any new comment or question in the program? No.
There's a comment from Miguel in Mexico. Considering that in many hospitals there's no dedicated personnel for data entry, one of the potential weaknesses of IFSO registry is the accuracy of the data. Is there any IFSO plan to address this? So around personnel dedicated to putting the data in.
Yes, I think it's what we have discussed today. We think that this is important, and we are thinking about to create some training to offer to these people that will input the data in the registry programs. It's a good observation, Miguel.
If I'm thinking about our registry and what we'd like to see, I think it's very similar to what everyone else has been saying about PROMs, direct-to-patient sort of methodology to get information from our patients. But I guess our last thing that we want is to try to get the final 10% of surgeons on board. So we currently have about 90% of surgeons in Australia who have said that they're happy to participate in the registry, and nearly 100% in New Zealand. New Zealand's got 12 surgeons. It's a little bit smaller than Australia. But 12. Yeah, 12 surgeons. But nonetheless, we've got all of them on board, which is terrific. And we don't have any way of making it mandatory in Australia. So we've had to go on goodwill and going around and making people see the value in it. We have CME points. So with our college, to stay credentialed as a surgeon every year, you have to demonstrate that you're involved in an audit process, that you've got an independent review of your practice that's being benchmarked. So we've got recognition from the college for that. We give people reports each year that show where they sit. But still there's about 10% of surgeons who say it's too much hard work and they don't want to be part of it. And so I would like to either have the capacity to make it mandatory, but I don't think Australian law is going to enable me to do that. But I'd like to know from other societies what they've done to get that last 10%, because I suspect it's that last 10% is the group that we really want to get. They're the group that we really want to know what's going on in their practice. Have other groups had trouble with people being wanting to participate?
So in Swedish, in Netherlands, to report and to register in bariatric surgery, it is mandatory. How the surgeon should report, or the surgeon can decide about not reporting?
No, it's truly mandatory, and it is made mandatory by the Dutch College of Surgeons. So it's not legislation, but it's a norm put in place by the Royal College of Surgeons in the Netherlands. If you do not register, and we know who registers and who doesn't, then you're not able, or you will not get reimbursed. So that's ending your practice. So getting reimbursed, you need to participate in the mandatory registration.
And for private patients?
We don't have private patients in the Netherlands.
So in special situations, let's imagine that a surgeon decided that with the multidisciplinary team, that patient with 2080 BMI and diabetes is a good case for a metabolic surgery. The register will accept a patient with 28 BMI and diabetes?
Yes, there are no restrictions to register. There might be restrictions for the indication to get the surgery done. So in contrast to a lot of other countries in the world, we are still struggling with the class 1 obese patients and diabetes. And we're working hard to get that reimbursed as well. But if you decide to operate on somebody who does not meet the IFSO criteria, there is a chance you do not get reimbursed, but you have to register that patient. So even if you're outside the criteria to do the surgeries, you still have to register your patients.
Joan.
Well, our registry is not mandatory, and it's not the surgeons that are associated with the registry, it's the hospital, it's the unit. So a surgeon working in a certain unit, he cannot say, well, I'm not going to register this patient, because it's usually a medical administrator that is responsible to get all the patients into the register. We have some small private units, but they about 10-15% of the patients pay themselves in Sweden, and but they have joined the register basically because of professional pressure.
That's a government decision. It's an intervention. So the hospital has to register, has a database.
No, there is no law. There is no regulation from the government. Even the hospital is still voluntary, but it is an agreement. That was I mentioned. You have to have a consensus in the profession. That almost all surgeons agreed that a registry is good. And then there were a few small private units. They were not part of the decision, but they started, they realized that they had to have control over the quality if they wanted to compete with the government hospital. So they joined the registry as well.
Can I ask, because who ensures that these private are reporting accurate data? Because in Ontario, we had a group of private clinics who were doing private banding, which wasn't covered. And they were reporting incredible data. And yet, these patients were having major surgeries, reoperation by other public hospitals. And so who looks at the veracity of the data coming in? Because they use this data to promote themselves and attract patients.
When the unit joined the register, they signed a contract with us, and so we have the right to come there and do on-site visits to check their data and comparing them with what's in the registry. And if they had...
So you audit them?
Yeah, we audit them, like everybody else.
I think those relationships that you're describing are really important, and that's been a challenge in our context, where about 80 to 90% of separations occur in the private setting, and often the surgeons work alone in that situation. They don't work in a group. And then when something goes wrong, they end up at the public hospital or at a bigger private hospital being cared for by a bigger team, which is appropriate for the patient. But it can be that that hospital is not normally doing bariatric surgery. It might just have gone in under the general surgeons, so we don't necessarily capture it. Or it could be that the public hospital forgets to put them into the registry. So we've been working hard with our big public hospitals. Luckily, Lyon's at the big one in South Australia, and I'm at the big one in Victoria, and so we're able to capture a lot of them that way, because we do cross-reference with discharge coding, but discharge coding for complications often relates not to bariatric surgery, but to general surgery, to laparotomy, laparoscopy, gastroscopy, whatever it may be.
But if the patient is followed up,
then we can
the
find
patient
out.
will know that they have had a complication.
And that's where we see the real strength of that relationship.
How many hospitals are involved in your registry?
In Sweden, it's 39 right now.
So imagine, we need to geographically adapt this. In Brazil, you have 800 hospitals. Yeah. To audit this at 875, we're submitting our metabolic surgery to covering for private insurers. So that's why I know the numbers. So one Almino in our country, auditing 900 hospitals. So it's impossible. So we have to think on strategy. I know what Miguel Herrera might think. In Mexico, they do not know exactly how many hospitals are doing bariatric surgery. So how will they go for a national registry? And this is one of the main reasons why in Mexico metabolic surgery has such a low penetrance. It's the lowest in the world probably. And they have a lot of diabetics and a lot of obese patients. So because it's difficult to audit. So I think IFSO, on our committee, we should set some strategies on behalf of them to help some countries that don't have the control on operations, on the language that Ronald has different dictionaries. So I think it's our mission as a global organization to do this. And I think everybody here is eager to help, and many of you that have a developed registry like you two from the Netherlands and from Sweden, to extrapolate to bigger countries, bigger numbers, what we should do to follow your path. So I think all of the world that's listening to us need our help.
And even if you can't audit all hospitals, you can take a random number of hospitals and audit them.
Yeah, we should do this.
Much better than nothing.
A simple quality check, as we do in randomized controlled trials for statistics. But we need to write that down. And in our position paper from IFSO, this would be one of a big paragraph on how we could do quality check-in by sampling the hospitals, sampling the surgeons, and move forward with this very noble test that we have.
Yeah, we've been looking exactly at that, because we've nowhere near 800, but we've got 180 hospitals.
That's a big number.
It's a big
four
number.
times Sweden.
180 ethics committees to deal with. 180.
Yeah.
It's a big number, and so we've been looking at some of the market research methodology, looking at sampling and how you can reliably sample a community, as well as what we do in trials. So I think sampling's the way forward, and we also are developing at the moment an SMS portal that we'll be able to send out to all our patients on a regular basis, partly giving them a reminder that that they've had bariatric surgery and they should go back to see their doctor and maybe give them some good health messages, but also through that portal get them to go into it and gift us back the information we're looking for. And I think, as you said before, that's a really good internal check, because the patient will know if they've had another operation, they'll know if they've gone to another hospital. They may lie about their weight. We think that they consistently lie by about 3 kilograms. But over a whole population, if someone underrepresents their weight by 3 kilograms, it probably doesn't matter too much.
I think it's been very interesting that you've all talked about the complexity of many units and many surgeons in the country. But just taking New Zealand alone, with only 12 surgeons, it has been much easier to get them on board, 100% participation in a national audit. So I think we should also use that example to the emerging countries, the societies that haven't got a bariatric registry nor a society, they're starting their bariatric service. We should reach out to these emerging countries that it's easier to start early with a small number of surgeons, build up their registry, then they can progress up that complexity of a registry.
And the other lesson from New Zealand was that we really established in Australia first, because we didn't have any funding for New Zealand, because the Australian government will only fund activity within Australia. It won't allow us to fund activity in New Zealand because it's a separate country. But because we'd gone through the pilot process in Australia, we'd gone through the implementation phase, it was much cheaper to implement in New Zealand because we already had all of our ethics packages together, we had our data governance packages together, we had the methodology and everything well defined.
That's why I think we can reach out to countries that haven't started, that we can, give them at least a protocol.
And in the other hand, about the patient can decide that I don't want to have myself included in this registry. The patient can say no.
Yes, absolutely. Opt-out is always possible.
Same for us.
Yeah, we have about a 3%. We have about a 3% opt-out rate.
So who explained for the patient that, look, we have here a registry, you can be part or not? Who do that job?
Surgeons.
We have a multi-step process where the surgeon has advertising in the rooms, the patients get given a brochure at the time when they're booked for their surgery, and then the patient then gets sent a letter after their around 2 weeks after their surgery, explaining the registry and what it's trying to achieve, and then there's a self-paid return envelope or a 1-800 number they can ring to opt out, and they have a window of time, 2 weeks, to which they can opt out.
So, Salma, I think that your country was the last one here to adhere to a program of registry. Can you tell us what kind of difficulty you have to implement the registry in Kuwait?
Yeah, first of all, I think having a registry is a very important mission and deliver a message to the society that we care about our society and we are serious about that, not only for the patients, also for the physicians, so they know we track our records and so on. In Kuwait, we were able to start our national registry 4 years ago. And basically the difficulty was who will enter the data. And we know all the stories with medical records and burnout that happens and might be related to amount of time surgeon or physician do when they do the medical records. So we hired special personnel, which is non-medical, trained by the registry company, so making sure they capture the right information and they are unbiased as well. So, and we distributed those in all the hospitals. And that's during the past 3 years, we were able to capture more than 86% data. And the difficulty, the challenges is to how to do the follow-up next. And I also agree with all the speakers, the follow-up is the most difficult part, I think, but with the new gadgets and technology, nowadays we can utilize that to our advantage, whether it's wearable devices. Nowadays there's wearable devices that can check your calorie count. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, that might help us with the follow-up.
How things are working right now in Kuwait? The register is mandatory, or the surgeon can decide about to participate or not?
So it's basically departments, and it came by a decision from the ministry that each hospital has to have a registry. And then the Department of Surgery, the data goes through that. So the capture of the data goes automatically. So the surgeon will not enter the data, the department unit will enter the data. So the other difficult part for us as China is the private sector, I think, and for us was it difficult to choose which database we have to use. And that's why it's important to do courses and training such as this course. And so when the countries want to start a registry, they need to know which registry to choose and who will support that registry from two different perspectives. One is economy, financial. The other is legally, how that will affect the country, because we have different legal systems. So for us, I think what worked for us is to have an independent body that collect data for us, really trained. So training, education is very important. And for the follow-up, I think that will be the most challenging part for us. And we look forward for such a meeting so we can learn from each other and move forward.
Ronald, for how long do you have a program of registry?
We used 2014 to develop the registry, and we started mid-2014, and we collected the data officially from January 1st, 2015. So we're 4 years old now.
Joan, for how long?
We are 12 years now.
12 years. Anyone more than 12 here? Richard, how long you have in UK?
We started 2009.
2009. So in these years you are working with registry programs. What could you see of benefit for bariatric and metabolic surgery in your countries?
That's a very good question. From the UK perspective, we've participated in mandatory annual surgical outcomes reporting, which show in the public domain the surgeon-specific mortality rate for surgery since 2013, 2014. So that's publicly available. And at the time, there was a big drive to for transparency in the British surgical agenda. So cardiac surgeons were having their pictures on the front page of the newspapers, and the problem with the newspapers is that they have impact factors far higher than the New England Journal of Medicine or the Lancet, because one of them has 31 million readers every single day, and that's just the people who buy them, and the problem is they're on the coffee table of every workplace. So if you have bad cardiac surgeon on the front of a newspaper, you're going to think twice about having your cardiac surgery in that hospital. And that was also reflected in bariatric surgery, and we managed the press releases extremely carefully so that we in fact didn't have any outliers in terms of mortality risk for individual surgeons, but we were very careful to manage the process. So every single death that was in the coroner's court, and there was an inquest on the internet, we did internet searches for bariatric surgery, coroner's inquests, deaths, etc., 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 so that we knew that every death that there was that had happened was in the registry to protect the surgeons. So we were slightly paranoid about it, but having the registry has protected us because we were able to say in the public domain, look, these are our results. And when we released our last report, or one of the reports I was involved with in 2014, we had a big press release. We reached third in the national news and the BBC. We were the first item in the health news, and we were in all the influential newspapers. And it was a really, really good positive PR benefit for bariatric surgery, and that's continued ever since then. Of course, today's news is tomorrow's forgotten item, and of course, further headlines come up with show bariatric surgery again with the occasional death, and it's so for us we are clearly demonstrating to the payers that we are submitting our data, and we have a very low mortality risk. So overall, it's of great benefit. If we hadn't done so, then we would be in the public domain shown not to be complying, and that would be very bad for us. So I'm happy that we comply, and I'm happy we do it, and I'm happy to show the public that we're doing a good job, which we are doing.
We've published on this. We've seen 3 different impacts that our registry, which is now 9 years old, has made in our province. First, and as was mentioned, we've seen a steady improvement in the outcomes, and it is not just the surgeon experience, because even some of the younger, newer units which have started, and as part of it is because within registry, you're going to ongoing improvement in your processes and standardization, because your results impact what you do, and so this has led to a significant and steady improvement in the outcomes. But 2, as Richard said, as a result of that and the reporting of those, we've seen a change in patient referral, both because of patients' acceptance, but also referring physicians. The family doctors or the endocrinologists who are now seeing bariatric surgery not as a risky thing, which they experienced 20 years earlier when it was open, then it's something which has got a mortality the same as basically a fundo or hernia surgery, etc., in fact less than a fundo. So it has changed the referral because of that. But the third important thing is, because our data set was set up, we do significant health economic analysis for the government, which pays. I mean, this is a public system. So as a result, the number of bariatrics in our jurisdiction in 2010 when we started was only 1,600. Now it's over 4,000 surgeries. So they're actually funding them. So they fund not only the surgery, but also the registry, because they see they're able to make decisions about where they're going to put the healthcare dollars. So we've seen all 3 of those improvements in the impact by having a registry. If without the registry, I don't think we would have seen so many of those.
Anything more to add in this question? No? So, Joan, can we see the SO-REG as the continuity of the SOS, or there is no relation in between them?
Well, there is a historical relationship, but you know, SOS was different. It had a control group, and it was research, pure research. SUREG is used for research, but it's mainly a quality registry, so it's a difference there. But I think it has, one of the contributions for SUREG has been to make bariatric surgery acceptable both in the medical community and in the general public, because you know, a lot of doctors on the medical side, they question what we do. And they really can't do that now. They don't have a registry of their own for obesity. We are the ones with the registry and can show the positive result, and that's always impressive.
Wendy, as the chair of the meeting, you wanna say something more to close, because I think we can. Sure. We can close.
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone who's participated today. We've had I think a really fantastic discussion earlier in the day with our committee, and followed on by this very interesting and I think very useful meeting. I'm very grateful to Almino for coming up with the idea of having an international meeting to discuss registries, and I think it highlights the importance that we're seeing for registries as a profession. Many thanks as always to Manuela, who actually ties everything together and makes it all work. We really couldn't do this without you. But most of all, I'd just like to thank all the people who are interested in registries, because if we keep that interest going and we keep moving with the momentum forward, I feel very confident that we're going to come up with some developments within the global registry that will bring really good outcomes for our patients and will help to provide the surety to everyone, to the payers, to the surgical community, to the other medical professions, to our indemnity agencies, that the surgery we're doing is effective, it is safe, and it is an important treatment option that should be up front and centre in the armamentarium when we're considering how to best manage a patient with metabolic or obesity-related diseases. So thank you all very much for your participation today.
And say for this, that guys that continue with the interest in registry, that in Madrid we have a full session again about registry as a postgraduate course. Richard Welburn, thank you. Ricardo Cohen, Lilian Kao, Wendy Brown, Mevan Vari, Jonathan San, Samuel Sabar, Ronald Lyon. Thank you on behalf of IFSO for this incredible contribution you gave today. What in the past I was thinking about, we should do this by some conference call or something like this. But after the meeting today, I'm very sure that we need to do this with a presidential meeting, as we have done. It's much more much better in order to have all the conclusions we could to have today, and to prepare something for the future, and to have the project we could have been done for today. And so let's continue with that. It will be very important. We really agree and believe that to have this kind of registry is very important, not for IFSO, but for bariatric and metabolic surgery. Thank you very much.
Thank you.